The meta always seems to be shifting from season to season, so I'll be ranking every single assault rifle from garbage to meta for Warzone's last stand. Welcome back, I'm Austin, and let's hop straight into this tier list by ranking Modern Warfare ARs first. So we're going to be starting off with the Odin, and this thing will actually go into viable. No one really uses it, but it actually has a very good time to kill. Its fire rate is just super low, which makes it very unforgiving if you miss any shots. It's basically the Modern Warfare version of the EM2. Now, the Modern Warfare AK-47, another weapon that isn't really used, but once again, I think it can make it into the bottom of the viable category because it has a really good time to kill. It just has quite a bit of recoil for long range, which is why it isn't very good for Caldera, but you could probably get away with using this on Fortune's Keep or Rebirth Island. Now the Ram 7, this is definitely better than the AK and the Odin, and it's on the brink of being competitive, but I think because its damage per mag is so low, it really limits you to using it in solos or duos to be its most effective. Now for the Kilo, they buffed this and they nerfed it, but even when it was buffed, it was never really good. It's going to go into the below average tier. Its time to kill is just way too low, even though it's an absolute beam. There's much better options that are just as accurate, if not more, so it's going to be below average. And speaking of options like that, it's going to be the Grau. This thing's going to go straight into competitive. It's been buffed recently. The TTK is 984 milliseconds, which is basically right around average for an assault rifle at long range. But since they buffed the next shot multiplier, if you get 2 next shots, you actually get to lower that TTK, and it's super accurate and has good damage per mag. It's just a solid all-around weapon. Now the M13 is kind of like the Grau, but it has a little bit faster time to kill with a faster fire rate, making it more forgiving. But the only problem is damage per mag, but because its time to kill is so good and it's such a beam, it's still going to be one of the better assault rifles within Warzone. Now if we go to the FN Scar, this is going straight into niche because I actually think it's pretty good in solos, but because you can only get that 30 round mag, you can't really use it past that. I don't know why they've never changed the magazine size on this like they have for other weapons, but for some reason they never did that for the Scar. And it could have been a really good weapon if it just had a 50 round mag. The AS Val is also going to go into niche, but this one makes sense why they didn't give it bigger than a 30 round mag, because it just had the fastest time to kill for an AR for the longest time up close, and it still is super fast and can be used in solos as a sniper support or as an SMG, but since you can't use fast solos, it's only going in niche. The M4A1 is actually better than people think. It's going to go in the upper echelon of viable. I think I'd put the Ram in front of it, but definitely better than the Odin in Modern Warfare AK. It's actually still fairly accurate, and its time to kill is around 960 milliseconds, which is very competitive at long range. A pretty decent assault rifle. Now just moving on to the FAL, this one's also going to go into niche because up close with a good trigger finger and accuracy, the TTK is absolutely insane, but the FAL is very unforgiving if you miss shots, and then the magazine is a bit small, so it can definitely be used in solos or duos as an SMG if you're really accurate with a good trigger finger, but I wouldn't be running to go use this weapon. The FR556, just like to call the FAMAS, is going straight into garbage. This is probably the worst assault rifle in the entire game. I'm going to put this in quotations. It can theoretically get a good time to kill, but the reason that's impossible is because the bullet spread on the burst is super wide, so it's really hard to hit all 3 of your bullets in one burst, so therefore you're really never going to get the top end theoretical time to kill, and that's why it's so trash. Now we're going to go to the AMAX. This thing used to be meta, then they nerfed it into oblivion, and then they rebuffed it to be very viable. I would throw it above the M4A1 and below the Ram 7. The TTK is at 950 milliseconds, which is going to be better than a weapon like the Grau and worse than the M13, but it's going to have much more recoil than both of those, so it requires more skill to use, but it doesn't give you the upside of having a better time to kill if you're hitting your shots. And it also has a slow fire rate, which makes it unforgiving, but since it's a little bit harder to use, it's only going in viable. Now for the last Modern Warfare assault rifle, the AN94 is going to be a niche weapon. You could probably throw it at the end of viable, but I'm going to throw it in niche just because it has this weird thing where the first few bullets you fire have a faster fire rate, and if you hit those, it actually has a very competitive time to kill. But if you don't hit all of those bullets where it's firing faster, the TTK is trash, so it's not going to be very good. Alright, moving over to the Cold War weapons, the XM4. We're starting off with a good one. This is still a very competitive long-range assault rifle, but the problem with it is they nerfed its up-close TTK, so therefore it makes it a lot less versatile. You definitely can't use it as a sniper support now, but as a long-range AR, it's still very good, but it has a little bit more recoil than these other 2 weapons, so it's slightly harder to use, but it's still very good. Now the FFAR, this one will also go straight into competitive, but in a completely different sense to these other assault rifles because it's only good as an SMG or a sniper support. You do not want to be using this thing as a long-range weapon, but if you're using it exclusively up close, it still has very good stray speed and a very good time to kill. The Groza, this is basically an FFAR, but worse, so it's going to go into viable. You also only want to use this thing as a sniper support, but there's really no reason to use it over the FFAR. And now this AM63 is going to represent the Vargo 52 because the image isn't down here for some reason, but this is going to be the first meta weapon I put on the list. It's going to have the fastest time to kill out of all these competitive or meta weapons at 900 milliseconds, and it has no recoil. It's basically the M13, but has a 40 millisecond faster TTK at long range. I just made a video with the top 5 secret meta weapons, and this Vargo 52 was on that list because it is the second best AR in all of Warzone. I don't know why people aren't using it. No recoil, fast fire rate, really good time to kill, really easy to use. Just please use the Vargo 52. Let's move on over to the Cold War AK-47, which I think is still a meta long-range assault rifle. It's not going to be as good as the Vargo because it has more recoil and you have a worse fire rate, which makes it less forgiving when you miss your shots on top of the extra recoil. But you have the same time to kill at 900 milliseconds, and it's still very easy to aim in my opinion, but you can't use it as a sniper support. Kind of like the XM4, it also got nerfed up close, so it's exclusively like a long-range weapon now. And now let's move on to the QBZ. This is a weapon that I think has been underrated for the longest time, and no one uses it for some reason, but it's definitely still a competitive assault rifle. This actually has a time to kill of 880 milliseconds at long range, which is faster than all of these weapons up here. It also has insane mobility for an assault rifle. It's actually going to be the fastest mobility assault rifle from Cold War or Modern Warfare. So you get good mobility, a good time to kill with fairly low recoil. Just the recoil pattern goes up and to the left instead of up and to the right, which is what 99% of assault rifles do. So that's why people might think it's a little bit harder to aim. Now the C58, this is going to go in competitive as well. It's actually going to be a little bit harder to aim than pretty much every other single weapon in the competitive or meta tier. But why it's so good is that its time to kill up close is the same as its time to kill at long range, meaning it never drops off. So its TTK at long range is insane at 868 milliseconds, the fastest on this list. You have great damage for mag. The only problems are it has slightly slower aim down sight speed and slightly more recoil. So this is for a more highly skilled player to use. But if you can control recoil, the C58 is probably going to be one of your best options as a long-range assault rifle. Now we're going to move on to the Grov, and I don't know whether to put this in viable or competitive, but because I am a fan of the Grov, I'm going to throw it at just the bottom of competitive underneath all these other weapons. There's going to be another one that has a really good time to kill at long range, but has a little bit more recoil, and the damage for mag is a little bit low, but you still have a really fast fire rate. The Grov is one I think is really fun to use on Fortune's Keep or Rebirth, because then the recoil isn't as big of a deal, and you have a good time to kill up close and a good time to kill at long range, so it can be a sniper support or a long range assault rifle. Now let's just move on to the FAR 83, and this is one that definitely used to be meta, but they did nerf its long range TTK by 75 milliseconds, so I think that throws it into competitive because it basically has the same time to kill as the Grau, actually 9 milliseconds better, but we have slightly more vertical recoil, so it's a little bit harder to use, but we have a good fire rate, which makes it really forgiving, and I still find it really easy to aim because it's exclusively vertical recoil, so I still have a fun time using it, but it's definitely not the best, but still very competitive. Now we're going to go to the Krig 6, and I just kind of see this as another Kilo. It's very accurate, but has a very slow time to kill, and there's just weapons that do what they do, but better, kind of like the M13, the Vargo 52, like there's just so many really accurate weapons that just have way faster TTKs. The EM2, and I'm just going to throw this thing right next to the Odin, because if you remember earlier, I said the Odin is just the Modern Warfare version of the EM2. We got a really solid time to kill, but we have a really slow fire, making it super unforgiving, and they both have some recoil. So if you're really highly skilled, this thing could definitely move up to competitive. Now we're moving on to the Vanguard weapons, the NC41. I think we all remember this thing from last season. Everyone was using it. It was super OP. Luckily, they nerfed it, and now I think it's only viable. It's still super accurate, but the time to kill is definitely below average. It's over 1,000 milliseconds, which means there's really better options. Like I've said, there's other guns that are accurate and kill faster, so we might as well just use them instead. Going to the Cooper Carbine. This is a weapon that I've struggled between putting to competitive and meta, but I'm only going to throw it in competitive because they have nerfed it a few times where they've added some recoil, lowered its TTK, but it's still a very good SMG or sniper support option, and it's very good at long range, but the damage per mag is very low, like I mean insanely low, so it's very hard to use in modes past duos. But for some reason, even though they've technically added recoil to it, it's still an absolute beam, so I still love this weapon. It just isn't quite meta in my opinion. Now the AS44, this used to be the fastest killing AR in the entire game, but they did nerf it slightly. Still has a crazy time to kill, still a great SMG. I would kind of throw it in the same ballpark as the FFAR, but with a slightly faster TTK and a little bit more recoil for it, but I would never use this thing as a long range AR because it has way too much recoil. Go over to the Volk. This is a weapon that I think might go in competitive, but I'm gonna throw it into meta at the bottom just because I think it's the best sniper support for assault rifles in the entire game of Warzone, because you have an insane TTK close of 630 milliseconds when you put on the 45 round Gorenko ammo and the recoil booster, which is actually gonna be equivalent to the fastest TTK SMG from Modern Warfare or Cold War. And then this is the fastest mobility assault rifle in the entire game of Warzone, even beating out the QBZ. And it's also really accurate, and if you put on sleight of hand, the 45 round mag isn't really a problem because you reload in under 2 seconds. Long range is probably only in the viable tier. It's still decent, but definitely not meta. The SMG 44, you've been seeing it get nerfed a lot, and you probably don't think it's meta anymore unless you're one of my subscribers who watches all my videos. It is still a meta assault rifle if you use it properly, but you probably aren't. I'll have that video linked in the pinned comment down below, but basically if you use the 60 round mag and then you switch up a couple attachments to make the recoil equivalent to what the 50 round mag does, you're gonna have a 900 millisecond TTK, which matches that AK-47 from Cold War, but it's actually more accurate. But people just are sleeping on it because they aren't putting on the right attachments. Just go watch that video after this one. You won't regret using this SCG. All right, now the Eat Your Burst. This used to be absolutely awful, but then they buffed it a lot, and it can actually be really good up close. Like, have you ever noticed in the Gulag how quickly it drops people? That's because your fire rate in the burst can be over 1100 rounds per minute if you run all the attachments, but at long range, it's still kind of trash. I'll just throw it in the bottom of viable to be nice. It might be below average, but screw it, you know? I find the Eat Your Burst a little bit fun to use as an SMG. Now for the bar, this used to be meta, and I loved using it with the BMG ammo, not the Clouser one, so I know that was a little bit weird, but I still think the BMG ammo is better, but it's only in viable because they've added a lot of visual recoil to this weapon, making it a lot harder to use, even if they didn't add too much actual recoil, but it's still very unforgiving because the fire rate's super slow. I personally just think the bar is a slightly better version of the EM2 or the Odin. Now for the Automaton, this is actually the highest average KD assault rifle in all of Warzone, so you would think I'd put it in meta, but I just don't like it, so I'm gonna throw it in competitive. Like, it's really accurate, and it has like a 975 millisecond TTK, so that'd be the equivalent to the Farah and slightly better than the Grau, but it just takes so many bullets to knock someone at long range. It's like 15 or 16 bullets, so the damage per mag, even though it has 75 bullets, is still pretty low, and I just don't like weapons that are super pea shooters without having an insane fire rate, because the M13 is also a pea shooter, but its fire rate still makes its time to kill better, and it makes it feel a little bit nicer even though you're still taking 15 bullets to knock someone. I'm just an Automaton hater. All right, so the next 4 assault rifles are going to be represented by these pistols because they're the DLC weapons from Vanguard and their images aren't down here, and the Rat is going to represent the KGM40, which I think just barely makes it into the bottom of competitive because its time to kill got nerfed to be slightly below average instead of being above average like it used to be, but it's still an absolute beam and super easy to use, very noob friendly. I just would rather use the Grau or the M13, but the KGM40 is still solid, especially if you put on Vital, because that will actually lower the time to kill to be slightly above average again if you hit a few chest shots, but then you add a little bit more recoil and a little bit more skill into it. Next up, the 1911 will represent the Nikita, and the Nikita is one that I don't know whether to put into viable or competitive. Its damage per mag is absolutely atrocious, and if you build it out to be a long range weapon, the mobility is terrible, but the time to kill is still pretty good. Then if you build it for up close, you're going to add a little bit more recoil, but then it has like a slightly above average TTK up close. I'm going to throw it in viable because I still think it's a good weapon, but it just isn't quite on the level of those competitive ones. And now this machine pistol will represent the Vargo S, not to be confused with the Vargo 52 that I put into meta. The Vargo S is absolute garbage, dude. This thing could arguably be worse than the FR556, but I'm not going to quite put it there because at least I can actually hit all of my shots, but the time to kill is over 1100 milliseconds. Like, I don't care that they buffed the bullet velocity in Warzone Last Stand. Like, I don't know what they're thinking with this weapon. The time to kill up close is atrocious. The time to kill at long range is atrocious. It doesn't matter anything else they buff unless they buff that TTK. Now for the last weapon, the Clouser will be the EX1, which I don't really have much experience with, so I don't know where to put it. And it's really weird because you can make it like a sniper or an AR. Like, there's all these different settings for it. It can overheat even before like the clip's empty. The only thing I can say is, like, I'll throw it in niche because it's really annoying when someone's shooting that thing fully automatic and all those red lasers are in your face. It makes it really hard to see. So you can let me know if you have more experience with the EX1. Maybe it's better than I think. Well, that's gonna do for this one. I'm gonna have the SMG tier list linked on screen for you guys, and then the SGG video will be in the pinned comment. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.